So as I mentioned, the actions that the target of the engineering takes may not be in their best interest. Going back to the idea of what I said earlier, the human voice is the original social engineering tool. Maybe there were some cavemen wandering around looking for food, and one convinces the other one, why don't you go in the cave and see if there's any food left over from that bear that just dragged in its kill from the day before. The first person doesn't want to go. They're afraid, perhaps. But they trick the other person into doing it. Well, if you go in there and you find some deer meat, I'll give you, you can have most of it. I just want a little bit. Getting something for nothing, right? These are some of the techniques that the social engineer might try. In the modern day and age, it could be that if you help me out, I'll tell your boss you did a great job. Or it could be, if you don't help me out, I'm going to complain to your boss and get you in trouble, right? That can go both ways. So it's important to think about all the different aspects of our communication. If we think about the psychological manipulation aspect, this is especially important. If you think about a skilled salesperson or a skilled politician for that matter, they're trying to get information across which may not match their body language. It may not match their physical expressions on their face. Their words may not seem to match with what they're doing. And typically a person who's paying attention notices these things. So someone is, for instance, telling you something which is bad news, but at the same time they're smiling, right? That seems strange. That shouldn't be happening. Unless that person is enjoying the fact that they're giving you bad news, which could be the case. Or perhaps someone is communicating with you and they're telling you something and they are fidgeting. They're hopping from foot to foot and their eyes are darting around. That tells you that they're nervous. Maybe what they're talking about isn't something that should make them nervous, but they might be nervous anyway because perhaps they're lying. Perhaps they're trying to trick you and they can't stop their body from reacting to that stress. So they might have sweaty palms. They might be fidgeting with their clothing, touching their lapel, playing with their ear. These are all what are called tells when a person might be lying to you. They're not guarantees to detect a lie, but most people will notice that and think that something is not quite adding up. Body language, facial expressions, these can be used to also help the engineer. If you're smiling when you're talking, it kind of comes across in your voice. You sound like you're a genuinely happy person. It helps when you smile when you talk on the phone. Most phone telemarketers will tell you that. It helps when you're smiling when you're talking to your target. They look at you and they think, well, that person's pretty friendly. They must like me. They're smiling at me. They might lower their guard. It might help the engineer get closer to the information that they're trying to elicit from that target. But we can also do things like misdirection. You say one thing, you do another. An example might be, telling someone something instead of asking them. Or another common technique is you ask someone a question and they say, no, I don't think that's true, right? They're nodding their head yes, but they're saying no. That's a mild form or minor form of misdirection. Or maybe you're shaking your head no while you're answering something yes. That tells the other person, in their mind, they're thinking the answer is no, but their words convey the answer yes. That misdirection might be noticed, it might not be. It depends on how skilled the social engineer is. You can practice in front of the mirror. Facial expressions especially might require some practice. Knowing how to show the difference between boredom or surprise or fear, right? All these things have their own roots deep in our human psychology. If you can't portray the facial expression correctly to match your words and your actions, most likely the target will detect this and become uncomfortable, become a little bit suspicious. So it's an important consideration to take. We also have the concept of emotional hijacking. This means that you are trying to manipulate the target into a emotional space or an emotional corner, if you will, and then try to find a way to give them a lifeline to pull them back out. And usually that lifeline is information that the social engineer wants. You could, for instance, try the authority approach. You call the target up, you say, I am, Jim Smith. I'm the assistant to the vice president of the bank. I need this report completed today, but I can't do it because I can't get into my computer. I need you to help me reset a password. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't reset a password until you prove your identity. No, you don't understand. This has to be done right now. If you don't help me, I'm going to have to call my boss. He's going to call your boss. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. You're probably going to end up with a meeting with your boss where he's going to be very upset because I didn't get this done on time. So there's a subtle bit of intimidation there. You're trying to force the person into a corner. And then they say, well, okay, well, what if I help you? What is that going to do for me? Well, if you help me, I'll tell your boss, or I'll tell my boss to tell your boss that you did a fantastic job helping me out in my time of need. He's going to give you a great recommendation that's going to go in your file. You're going to look good to your boss. Maybe that'll help you get a raise someday. You could see how that could play out. I'm giving a very short example. But if the skilled social engineer might come up with a much more elaborate story to make that person feel like they've got no choice but to help in that situation. If we consider social engineering attacks, we look at the news, we follow these kinds of stories, we know that very many people in different organizations are victims of these kinds of attacks. Look at Edward Snowden, for instance. He was able to socially engineer his fellow employees at the NSA, of all places. Those people should have known better. He tricked them into giving him access to information that was classified that he didn't have access to. By his own admission, that's what he said he did. I don't know what happened to those employees that gave up the information. They probably got into some sort of trouble, but he was obviously very skilled at creating a level of trust, and he probably used appropriate language and body language and facial expressions to make them think it was no big deal. Hey, I used to have access to this, but it went away. Can you help me out? Can I get this document from you? Whatever the scenario might have been. If you were to ask random people for information, on a street, sometimes people will tell you things that they probably shouldn't. Or if you perform a function where you're asking people to take a survey, you might be able to get them to give you their first name, their last name, maybe their birth date. Perhaps you can even trick someone into giving you their social security number, their driver's license number. All these are little clues, little pieces of info which can be useful for not only something like identity theft, obviously hackers do this, but for social engineering, you're getting clues to help build up a profile of this individual or their organization that they work for in order to perpetrate your social engineering pen test or a social engineering audit. Physical breaches, pen testing or social engineering pen testing can bypass physical security in many cases, as I mentioned. I used the example of a dumpster dive, but it doesn't have to be that you're physically there. You could penetrate physical barriers because they're not stopping you from using the phone or from talking to somebody outside the building. So some of those things might be useful for certain scenarios. If we look at some categories for social engineers, we have things like your average citizen, right? Mom and dad have to talk to their kids, trying to convince your children to do something and make them feel like it's their idea. That's the ultimate goal of any parent, right? That way the child does the required behavior without feeling like they're being bossed around by mom and dad. But average people talk to their friends, their family. They might be social engineering someone without even realizing it because it's just a natural part of how humans communicate. What about governments or recruiters? Recruiters in the sense of a job recruiter, sure, but what about someone who's trying to recruit you to do something that you don't necessarily want to do? Join a club, join the military maybe. Governments social engineer their citizens, they try to sell them on a certain idea, and then really something else happens, but their body language, their facial expressions, they're smiling when they say these things, people believe it, and then later they find out, well, that wasn't quite true the way it worked out. It's just a reality of life in this country and many other countries. Social engineering happens at the highest levels. We have scam artists and posers. These are obvious people that will try to trick you out of giving them money or doing something for them. Usually you meet these kinds of people in bars or on the street or at some other place where you don't expect to be scammed, like the grocery store. There's legions of these people operating all over the world and they have been for thousands of years. There's nothing new about this. Disgruntled employees, these most likely would be the victims of social engineering rather than the people performing it, but they could be performing it as well. Maybe they're upset that their boss passed them over for a promotion, so they try to learn enough information to embarrass that person. That could be a form of social engineering. If you're going to quit the company anyway, they might think, well, I'm not going to get in trouble. I'll uncover some information about my boss that I don't like, put that information out into the public, and then I'll quit my job. Right? That happens. Sometimes people do these things. It might be a petty form of revenge, but it does provide the social engineer with some gratification. Why do they do it, right? Identity thieves, this is their bread and butter. Social engineering is how they find victims, how they trick the victims, and how they get information in order to steal their identity, to open up credit cards or whatever the case might be. We also have spies. Spies, this is also their bread and butter. Every day they have to think about maintaining a persona, maintaining their profile, their facts, keeping their story straight. It's a very stressful job, obviously, so they have to become very practiced at many of the techniques that we'll talk about in this course. We also have pen testers and hackers. This course is designed, obviously, for pen testers. You could use this information to do bad things as well. That's the case with any kind of pen testing technology. But what we're focusing on is social engineering from a pen testing perspective. If you use these techniques for bad purposes, eventually that may catch up with you. If you break the law, you'll have to pay the price. So be careful how you use these tools. With great power comes great responsibility. All right, so who are natural social engineers? Children, top of the list, right? Mommy, can I go out and play? Why don't you go ask your father? Right? That's a typical response. The child goes, asks, and Dad, Mom said it's okay if I go out and play if you say it's okay. Now Dad has an incentive to want to agree. He doesn't want to appear to be disagreeable with Mom, so he might agree and give the child what they want. And of course, children at a very, very young age will figure out which parent is more likely to say yes. And then they'll try to use that parent's yes to get a yes out of the parent that's most likely to say no. I'm sure I did this when I was a child. You want ice cream, you want cookies, you want to go out and play, you want a new toy. You find a way to maneuver around your parents' different personalities in order to make that happen. It's very common. And it's natural, it's normal. People that are looking for jobs, they might have to do some social engineering in order to get the right information out of the potential employer or a recruiter or their fellow coworkers, trying to learn, well, what skills do you think are most valuable? What is it that you've been learning to make yourself more marketable? Right, those are elicitation methods, perhaps. Then we have people that are hanging around in bars. This is a good category of social engineer because there's lots of parlor games, if you will, people that will make bets knowing that the game is fixed. You know, doing three-card Monte, any number of those kinds of activities are forms of social engineering because you're trying to trick somebody into doing something that they wouldn't do by making it look fun, making it look like they might win some money. And really what you want is the money that they're willing to bet, which goes in the scam artist's pocket. It doesn't necessarily go to the victim. People that are in sales and marketing, they were born to socially engineer. This is what they're made to do. If they're good at it, they can become very successful salespeople because they can look at a target, read their body language, read their attitudes, read their or listen to their words, read their facial expression, and they figure out how to adapt and how to modify their technique in order to enhance their chances of making that sale. If you're an interrogator or someone running a polygraph machine, maybe you've got some techniques that you need to use in order to get information out of the person that's being interrogated or who's going through a lie detector test. The questions that are asked, the way they're framed, the elicitation techniques, all these have their impact on the eventual result of the pen test audit. Or in the case of some of these people, it has the end result on how they do their job. People that are good at this can be very successful. So in a general sense, why social engineering perform? I've been talking about pen testing reasons. So if you're trying to find vulnerabilities in an organization, maybe their physical security is vulnerability, maybe their security awareness program is not very good, and the social engineer can find those holes, find those gaps, and get information that they shouldn't be able to access in order to prove that there's a need for improvement. If you're defending against social engineering, your organization in general, you've got many people defending against many hackers or social engineers. If you're performing it, if you're on the offense, then it's one to many. One engineer potentially interacting with many different individuals in order to get the information that's desired. In general, people, as a human nature aspect, will always try to look for the path of least resistance to get something. They're looking for shortcuts, looking for an easy way out. And this could be a impetus, if you will, to do social engineering. You might not think to yourself, well, I'm going to socially engineer myself into a better job at work, but it might work out that way. You're maneuvering, you're saying certain things to certain people, doing certain favors for other people, trying to build a reputation, trying to build up a rapport, and that can be later exploited in order to get what that person wants. And of course, if you're practicing social engineering techniques because you're doing a pen test or you're about to, you need to work with your family and friends and just don't tell them that you're practicing, but just do the practicing. Talk to your mother, talk to your brother, talk to your best friend, whatever it is, and just practice a few techniques. It's harmless because maybe you already know that you trust this person, they trust you, you're not using the information for a bad purpose, but it gives you the advantage of having more experience before you attempt it on a live target. What are the goals of social engineering? What is it that you're trying to achieve? It could just be entertainment, right? The person that's doing this, maybe they have a large ego, they want to satisfy or gratify that ego, so they do it just because it's fun for them to trick someone into doing something that they didn't want to do. They stand back and watch their target make a fool of themselves, perhaps because the social engineer made them think it was a good idea. Some people get their kicks that way. Those are not very nice people, in my opinion, but that happens. It could also be that you're trying to do what's known as social climbing, right? People that are, maybe they come from a blue-collar background, but they want the lifestyle of the rich and famous. So they might socially engineer their way into a group that contains some wealthy people, hoping to find targets within that group that they can use to leverage access to other people that have money and a lifestyle of leisure. That might be what they're after. They can find a way to trick people into letting them into that inner circle. That's a form of a scam artist type activity, but it makes sense if we think about it in a social engineering context. Some people just want the knowledge and power that comes from being able to size up a situation and say the right thing or do the right thing to get something for your effort. And that could be could feed back into the ego gratification that I mentioned earlier, but it could just be that you want this knowledge and power because it advances your agenda to do something else. Maybe you've got a social cause that you're trying to promote, and social engineering techniques can help that. Or it could just be that you're trying to make money. Good old-fashioned motivator of dollars and cents. That goes a long way to get people to do something that they know is wrong, they know it's illegal, but it's easy for them. So they do it anyway because they can make money. It's a good motivator.